guys, what's up? 2-Bit Jesus here, and welcome to the July 2019 edition of the 2-Bit Review. Interestingly enough, I wasn't planning on doing a review this month because, as you guys remember, last month I did 3 reviews back to back with the Toy Story video game trilogy. So a few months ago, GaqzGaming put in a review request for Castlevania 64 or Legacy of Darkness. Now, I thought I could either take this month off or, hey, why not go ahead and review this game for this viewer? And I decided to do that because a few years back I did Donkey Kong 64. That was a viewer requested review and I didn't get to it till like a year later, but then there was so much going on. We were doing the podcast then and I had like 20 something reviews lined up at that point that I was like chewing through and trying to do, and I always felt bad that I didn't do that review right away. I put it on the back burner and didn't do it till like a year later. So I'm only a couple of months late on this one, but for GaqzGaming, we are taking a look at Castlevania Legacy of Darkness for the Nintendo 64. Castlevania Legacy of Darkness is an action-adventure platforming game developed and published by Konami for the Nintendo 64. It was released in North America for the holiday season of 1999. It's the prequel and also slight remake of Castlevania 64, with improved textures, added enemies, and reworked levels. Legacy of Darkness is the definitive version of Castlevania 64 and shows that the original game was rushed to release as Legacy's main character Cornell was featured in early press information for Castlevania 64, but was removed before the 64's release. All the voiceover work for Castlevania 64 has been removed, most likely due to the storage limitations of the 64's cartridge format, but it was used so sparingly in the original game, you don't really miss it except for Reinhardt and Carrie's opening prologues. This game also supports the Nintendo 64's expansion pack add-on, giving the game better textures but at the cost of a weak frame rate. I began capturing footage in high-res mode, but after lots of frame rate drops, I switched to the low-res mode for more fluid gameplay. Well guys, that's it for these tidbits. Let's drive a stake right into the heart of this review. The core to Legacy of Darkness's gameplay is platforming, with environmental hazards, basic enemies, and a boss fight there to prevent you from completing the level. This is a tried and true formula that still works till this day. The buttons are mapped out very well, and after learning them, it felt very natural to move around the environment and battle enemies, so the controls aren't all that bad, but there are issues. There are 2 buttons that aren't mapped very well. The game doesn't really tell you about them too unless you read the physical manual that came with the game. When playing Cornell, the left shoulder button activates his man-beast power, or should I say werewolf power. Problem is, to access this button, you have to move your hand to the left grip of the N64 controller, then back to the middle grip to continue playing the game. You have to do the same thing with the camera, which is controlled by the D-pad, which is also on the left grip of the controller. So in an intense situation, it's hard to switch hand positions on the controller to avoid getting hit or even dying in the game. I can't really fault the dev team too much on this, as this is what Nintendo designed for the system, so they're just doing the best they can with what Nintendo gave them to work with. One area I hate about the controls is the stick. It's a bit floaty and has a slight delay to it. So as you can see, with it being floaty and delayed, you're going to have problems at platforming parts of the game that require for you to have precise jumping and landing, or just walking on a thin piece of ground that is surrounded by death. And so, obviously, I had a lot of deaths in this game due to me slightly moving my controller stick, but my character making a sharp leap to the left or right and right into their death. The camera borders between workable to absolutely horrible, as it can't seem to stay still unless your character is walking forward. This makes the platforming parts frustrating, but at least having the D-pad to control the camera helps with this issue, but doesn't solve it. I can tell Konami was really emulating Mario 64 with the platforming elements, in games like Ocarina of Time, Silent Hill, or Resident Evil, with situations like being trapped in fights with monsters with no way to escape until you defeat said monster, exploring a mansion, dungeon, or tower for keys/items, and solving puzzles to get said items or keys. Another thing the game doesn't really tell you about is a vampire being able to latch onto you and suck your blood. Now, of course, it's Castlevania, they're vampires, that's what they're gonna do. So if you don't break free by rapidly rotating the controller stick, your status will change to vamp. This status keeps you from using certain items in your inventory, but luckily there is an item to purify you of this. Problem is, the game never says how to do this. So there were lots of instances where I tapped the A and B button repeatedly, like you would do, say, in Resident Evil if a zombie caught you, to try to break free, and it never really worked. I always ended up getting vamped. But again, like I said, luckily, you can get that item to purify you and cure you of your vampirism. Certain enemies can also poison you, but there's also an item you can use to cure that. If all this sounds very familiar to you, it's very much the survival horror elements of Resident Evil. I think especially for the style of Castlevania, these elements work very well. Legacy of Darkness wasn't just copying survivor horror, but dare I say pushing it forward, as there is a character in the game who is a business demon that sells you all the basic items you will need in the game if you can't find them in the wild. But I must say, when it comes to Renan, the demon salesman, read the fine print, because if you spend too much money, your soul is forfeit to him, and you will have to battle him to the death for it. A Castlevania classic is back in the game with sub-weapons that vary in type, like short range, long range, and the amount of damage they can deal out. You can pick up upgrades increasing their abilities. They do, however, have ammo in the form of red jewels that you collect throughout the game. Real quick, while I'm on the subject of weapons, your main weapon can be upgraded up to 3 times as well, each time increasing damage dealt out. But if you die or save and quit, when you get back on, your main weapon and sub-weapon for that matter default back to level 1. I get this happening when you die, but I feel it's a needless punishment for saving the game because, hey, you know, life happens. You gotta get off the game sometimes and go do something else. The level design has a broad range from mediocre, like the castle wall, or good, like the villa area, that reminds me a lot of Resident Evil 1's mansion, or even Resident Evil 2's RPD levels. It also goes to horrible, like the castle center, where you must carefully carry magic nitro through a nerve-wracking path. One fall or hit can cause you to explode, resulting in an instant death. I don't mind the nail-biting aspect of it, but the level just feels unfair and like it wasn't designed for such a situation. You have 4 characters to select from with their own unique abilities, stories, and stages. Cornell is a werewolf, or should I say man-beast according to the game here. He can claw enemies and fire energy from his hands. He has the ability to transform into a werewolf, and while this requires your jewels, the ammo for your sub-weapons, it does increase your damage you deal out, which comes in handy for the final boss fights. Henry, a knight, has a pistol which allows you to blast through all kinds of enemies. Dare I say, his main weapon is my favorite in the entire game, and probably because it's overpowered, but man is it fun to mow down those skeletons. Reinhardt, who is your prototypical Castlevania hero with a whip as his weapon. And finally, Carrie Fernandez, who has the use of magic. She shoots out a blast of magic to defeat her enemies. The gameplay actually had some high points where I had a lot of fun exploring and solving puzzles, and the enemies presented an obstacle, but not an overwhelming one for me. Also though, I have to mention the floaty controls, sometimes frantic camera, and the game telling you virtually nothing on how to deal with the environments and enemies. So with all this together, I'm going to give Legacy of Darkness's gameplay a solid 2 bits.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets!
Out of 4. The music is awesome. It really sets the tone and mood for its stages and the game overall. It has a gothic feel to it that at some parts put me in a dark and creepy mood. There's very little voice work in the game, but it is decent where it is placed and honestly not needed all that much. The sound effects sometimes sound a bit light and not as impactful, but for the most part they do the job, like Reinhardt's whip sound, or the very satisfying sound of Henry's gun blasting through monsters. So I'll end it with the sound effects and voice work being okay, and the music being awesome. Also, I didn't go into too much detail, but the music is very memorable. Like, I can recall almost all of the main themes of this game. They get stuck in your head. The composer did a great job with the soundtrack to this game. So sound gets 3 bits.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets!
Out of 4. The N64 had few and far between games that were not from Nintendo. In particular, I'm talking about it having less mature titles compared to, say, the PS1. Legacy of Darkness presents a Gothic-styled game. The graphics are dark and the colors look muted. The environments and characters look good with great detail for the time. I found myself immersed in this world visually. It is possibly the high mark for this game as everything just looks awesome. Now, I did try the game out in high-res mode and low-res mode, and I can tell you high-res, the graphics look a bit better, but you're not really missing out on too much if you decide to go with low-res mode to have better gameplay and general performance. Now, the story to Legacy of Darkness is freaking epic. It starts in the mid-19th century, starting with the man-beast Cornell, whose village is attacked by Dracula's forces. They kidnap his adopted sister Ada to be sacrificed so they can resurrect the Count. During the game, Cornell runs into his old rival, Ortega, another man-beast who sided with Dracula to unlock his werewolf powers, and to try to be more powerful than Cornell. He has a real Vegeta complex to him. Cornell also runs into the owner of the castle, J.A. Oldray, who is really a vampire and servant of Dracula. Cornell beats him and promises Mary, Oldray's wife, that he will save her son, Henry. Cornell then heads to the villa's hedge maze to save Henry from what I can only describe as the love child of the Frankenstein monster and Leatherface. Cornell then guides Henry to safety, but later in the game we'll see Henry again in his own story. Cornell runs into Dracula's servants throughout his quest, like Atrice the Witch, or, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing this, but is it Gilles de Rage, or Gies? I'm really bad at pronouncing this name. He's essentially the doppelganger servant or body double for Dracula later in the game. Near the end of the game, Cornell has to confront Ortega once again. They battle to see who is the best once and for all. Once Cornell comes out on top, Ortega tells him where his adopted sister is and jumps off a cliff. At the end of Cornell's story, he defeats Dracula and saves his sister, but at the cost of losing his man-beast power to Dracula, which was his goal all along. Ada was just the bait. With the man-beast power, Dracula is able to be resurrected more powerful than ever. A prophecy is made that a child shall be born with the soul of Dracula, and on his 8th birthday, Dracula's dark soul will awaken within the child. 2 heroes will emerge to battle him. We then move on to Henry's story, which is short and takes place during Reinhardt's and Carrie's battle with Dracula. Henry is a knight with the church. They send him to Dracula's castle to save children that were kidnapped by Dracula's minions looking for the child of prophecy. Henry's quest has few story elements to it. It's more open-ended rather than linear. The order in which you save the children is completely up to you. But at the end of it, Henry is successful at saving all the children in a short but fun story. We now move on to the 2 other characters who have similar stories with slight variances in them. Reinhardt is a Belmont descendant. He was chosen to receive the title of Vampire Hunter, and with it, the famous Belmont gimmick, a whip to kill vampires with. Reinhardt sets out to destroy Dracula. His story has him fighting through a cursed forest and castle. Then Reinhardt reaches the Villa Mansion. He encounters many people here, like Vincent, a fellow vampire hunter with a bit of an ego. A woman named Rosa, who is a vampire that has retained her humanity. And because of this, Rosa helps out Reinhardt throughout the game. And finally, Reinhardt runs into a boy named Malice, who was among some of the local children that were kidnapped by Dracula's minions. Like Cornell and Henry, Reinhardt must escort Malice through the hedge maze to safety. After exploring the castle and killing tons of monsters, Reinhardt runs into Rosa again, who is trying to take her undead life by stepping into the sun. Reinhardt saves her, which she comments on the irony of a vampire hunter saving a vampire and warning him not to travel further into the castle. Reinhardt encounters Death next. Death has brought Rosa and forces both of them to fight each other. Reinhardt comes out on top, but Death steals Rosa away. In this same part of the game, Reinhardt runs into Malice again. Reinhardt is puzzled as to why he didn't leave the castle, to which Malice asks strange questions and walks away laughing very evilly. Do I sense a red herring here? After reaching the top of the castle, Death ambushes Reinhardt, but Rosa sacrifices herself to save him, showing she hadn't fully been brought over to Dracula's side. Reinhardt then avenges her by sending Death back to hell. Reinhardt then defeats the Dracula imposter in the castle keep. The castle keep then begins to crumble away. As he escapes, Malice appears riding a demonic horse. Atop the tower, Malice reveals that he is indeed Dracula and transforms from a boy into a man. The two battle atop the tower, and after defeat, Dracula turns back into a boy, attempting to fool Reinhardt into thinking Dracula had just possessed the boy. Charles Vincent arrives on the scene and douses Malice in holy water, exposing him. Malice then transports Reinhardt to a desert realm and transforms into a giant demonic dragon. There is an epic battle that ensues between Reinhardt and demonic dragon Dracula. After defeating Dracula's final form, Reinhardt is transported back to reality where the castle sinks into the lake. Reinhardt then collapses to the ground, feeling grief for those that were lost. Suddenly, rose petals and then a rose drop down next to him and reveals Rosa, cured of her vampirism and freed from Dracula's curse. The two embrace, showing hope for the future. We then move on to Carrie Fernandez, who has a very similar story arc with a few differences. Carrie is a descendant of a powerful witch family that was executed for showing talents of witchcraft, including Carrie's parents. Carrie was adopted by a loving woman when Dracula's forces rose and killed her mom and fellow villagers. She sought out Castlevania and Dracula to end his evil reign. Carrie travels through the same beginning areas as Reinhardt, even running into familiar faces like Vincent, Rosa, and Malice. Instead of Death being an antagonist to Carrie, she has the evil witch Atrice to deal with. She at first tries to get Carrie to join her, but Carrie refuses. Carrie meets Atrice again later in the game. Atrice has captured a fellow Fernandez warrior who is related to Carrie. She has also turned her into a vampire. Like Reinhardt and Rosa, Carrie is forced to fight this fellow Fernandez, but unlike Rosa, the Fernandez does not survive the battle, and Carrie vows to put an end to Dracula. After traveling through the castle, Carrie confronts Atrice at the top of the castle for one final fight. After Carrie deals with Atrice, she sets her sight on Dracula. From here, Carrie's story follows Reinhardt's almost exactly, killing Dracula's doppelganger, then being confronted by Malice, the real Dracula, and battling him to the death. After Dracula's defeat, Carrie is transported back to her own dimension, where she watches the castle crumble into the lake. Her quest complete, Carrie visits her mother's grave to honor her memory. These two characters also have bad endings if you use too many sun or moon cards that speed up time to reach a certain time of day or night. You can tell you got the bad ending if at the end of the game a vampire Vincent confronts you before the battle with the imposter Dracula. Those endings are as follows. Reinhardt's bad ending sees him riding back to the village with Malice after defeating the false Dracula. Reinhardt speculates that Malice may be the next hero that has to fight Dracula. The scene ends with Malice's eyes ominously glowing red. Carrie's bad ending is the most twisted. After defeating the false Dracula, Carrie discovers Malice hiding behind a pillar in the castle keep. They leave the castle together, and on the way back to the village, Malice asks for Carrie's hand in marriage. Carrie refuses at first, but agrees to marry him when they're older. Malice mutters to himself, "Then we have a binding contract," showing the evil intentions of Malice. Or should I say, his malice intentions. Legacy of Darkness is a game that is packed with story. All the characters tie into and relate to each other, whether directly or indirectly, and the ending of the game ties up the story nicely. With an awesome gothic aesthetic and an epic story, presentation gets 3 bits.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets!
Out of 4. So Castlevania Legacy of Darkness holds a special place in my heart. It's a game I got as a kid, and I played the living hell out of it and really enjoyed it. And that's why it was hard for me to watch more famous reviewers the past few years just give this game a proper thrashing. But it was refreshing to take a look at this game and take the nostalgia goggles off and realize that this game does have some major flaws, so some of that thrashing was well deserved. But also the game has some shining moments, so it's not all that bad. So my final verdict for Castlevania Legacy of Darkness for the Nintendo 64 is a suggested look for the casual and, dare I say, well, I will say, a recommended buy for the hardcore collector of the Nintendo 64 or even hardcore collector of Castlevania games in general. You can find it online for the hefty sum of $45 depending on condition. Well guys, that's it for this review. I want to thank you all for watching, and most importantly, I want to thank GaqzGaming for requesting this review. I had a lot of fun going back and playing this game, and I got a chance to reminisce about some old memories of mine, because this game, like I said, is a game I played a lot as a kid on my 64. So I had a lot of fun doing this. And for everyone else, if there is a game you wish for me to review, just in the comment section below, request it, and I promise I will get to it. I might not get to it right away, but I will put it on the docket to be reviewed. Well guys, that's it for me. I hope you guys join me next month for the next review. As always, stay safe and play on.